recorded. Okay, so all sorts of announcements here. First thing is, you may have heard from some other teachers, but if not, you're about to hear it from me, that the recordings are not saving properly on Microsoft Stream. And I got an email yesterday, so I think that's happening to all the teachers. What that means is if you've been coming to Teams to look at the old recordings, you're not going to be able to find them here anymore because it won't save. So like if you scroll up in chat just a little bit, you'll see our meeting from last Wednesday, right? Just right there. Newer meetings aren't going to be there. So you have to go to the hub now to find our meetings. If you've always found our old meetings on the hub, then nothing will change, okay? I'm still putting links to the recording. It's just that now, instead of those links taking you to Microsoft Stream, they're going to take you to YouTube because I've been posting the videos on YouTube. Okay, so no difference. And don't worry, the YouTube videos aren't findable unless you have the link. So it's not like somebody's going to, just do a random search for whatever we're talking about and be able to see you answering my questions. Okay, only people with the link can find it. So there you go. Okay. Okay, so that's that. And in case you're not sure, if you're not sure where to find the links, okay, they're on the plan each day. There's something that says attend today's lecture. All right, and that has links to the classes. Okay. So there you go. Attend today's lecture has links to class recording. Okay. Second thing, I have posted. I have posted your last major grade. Now, real quick, first you're gonna have a test next week. Okay, towards the end of next week, Wednesday and Thursday. Okay, this class will be Wednesday. We will review Monday and Tuesday. What we learned today will be the last things that we learn for this. Okay, so there will be a test next week before you leave for Thanksgiving, and then you'll have a memo the last week of the cycle. But I have posted it now. Okay, I need to say this activity is homework. Okay, that's what I needed to change. Okay, so if you were to go to this plan, today's plan on the hub, you will see property law memo and adverse possession quiz. Adverse possession is what we're going to cover today. The property law memo mixes several things that we've learned into a memo, and we will spend time going over the memo later, but I'm putting it there now for you. If you have forgotten how to write a memo, go back to plans and go back to legal analysis and writing on the hub, and you will find all the stuff we talked about memos there. Okay. Sound good? Probably doesn't sound great, but you at least understand it. Okay. Okay, let's talk about adverse possession. Actually, I think I told y'all I had not covered how to enforce covenants last week or last class. I meant to do that. Okay. So I'm going to quickly do that and then we'll talk about adverse possession. Okay. So if you remember, we were talking about covenants, which was you and the other people in your area could agree to do and not do things with your property. And if you put it in writing, then excuse me, and intended for it to run with the land, and you made sure that all future owners had notice of it, and there was a legal connection between you and all the other owners, and vertical legal connection between current owners and the original owners, then that covenant would be bound on all future owners, right? And then we talked about how covenants could end right? Basically only by everyone who's currently bound by the covenant to agree to it. Okay. But we didn't talk about how to enforce them. And it's actually a lot easier than you think. Okay, so to enforce covenants, there's two options. Okay, one, the covenants may tell you how. They can say how they'll be enforced, right? So oftentimes these neighborhood covenants will talk about how they will create a homeowners association, and the homeowners association has the right to fine you, to fix things, whatever. Okay, so if the covenants themselves say how they can be enforced, then they can be enforced that way. Okay. The other option is the other owners subject to a covenant can sue the owners that are in violation. Okay, so these covenants are contract rights to other people's property, to control other people's property. And if someone's in violation of these covenants, you can sue them. Okay, and suing them you can get a court order for them to have to comply with the covenants. Okay. So that goes to question 4 on your homework from Monday. And I went ahead, the answers are in our channel, our class channel, right? I sent out a mass message about that. But if you haven't done it yet, here are also the answers to how you can enforce covenants. Okay, so any questions on that before I move on to adverse possession? Okay, now we're talking about adverse possession. Adverse possession is a concept in property law where if you act like you own someone else's property for long enough, it becomes yours. And it might sound funny, right? Like, you can just take someone's property? Yeah. And there's a couple of reasons for that. Okay. The original reason is that when property law was being developed, so for most of our history, okay, and then even going back to European history, the lines of property, the lines where property boundaries were not always clearly defined. Okay. And I'm going to draw y'all a picture here. So you can kind of see what I'm talking about, right? So you would often have a problem like this. Spot maybe so it's bigger. You would often have a problem like this, where let's say you had some neighbors. Okay, so you've got these two pieces of land right here. Okay, can y'all see that? Hopefully. A little darker. You'd have these two neighbors, and they own these two pieces of land. Now, for most of the history of property law, people weren't literate. There weren't professionals that would go out and measure everything. They would just be like, here's my yard, here's your yard. Okay, we live here. All right. Now let's suppose time goes on and one of the neighbors builds a barn out in their pasture. Let's call these people A and B, like we do. And let's say B goes and builds a fence. And B builds a fence. They're trying to keep it on their property, but they build it here. Okay, a few feet over the property. Well, A thinks B is building it on their property, so they just kind of, they don't say anything. And time goes by, and B sells it to C, and A sells it to D, and 100 years later, lots of stuff's happened in that time, right? Now, you don't have to wait 100 years. I'm just using 100 years as an example. A lot of stuff's happened. B has built a driveway, or whoever now owns it has built a driveway from this road that comes in right here, right? And they built a barn over here. And, you know, they've got their house, of course. And they've been planting crops over there like that, right? All this stuff. And now, you know, it's 100 years later, and A gets a map and realizes that their property line is supposed to be over here. And they go to B and say, all right, you got to tear all that up. It's mine. You can't have your stuff on my property. You're trespassing. We don't really like that can happen in the law, that a mistake about where the boundary is could cause all this work and years of history to be erased, because it's a big waste of time. I mean, it's a big waste of time and resources to have to tear down this barn, pull up these crops, dig up this driveway, right? All this stuff just because someone made a mistake a long time ago. Okay, so that's the first reason for adverse possession. Right? We're not really okay with that. Basically, if everybody's been acting like the property belongs to B, eventually we just say it does belong to B. Okay, so that's the first thing. And I'm going to give you the elements for it. All right. But now I want you to consider something else. A owns all this property. Okay. A just has himself a nice land. All right. Can you see that? It's so big, you know, there's a road over here, and A builds their house here, and they farm all this. All right. And maybe they have a barn over here, right? But back here is just a bunch of trees. You know, trees. I'm just gonna write trees so I don't draw them all. Hey, back here there's a bunch of trees. And they don't really go back there. Okay, they just kind of leave it. Maybe one day they'll get around to cutting down the trees and selling the timber and doing something back there. But for right now, they don't. And then along comes B. And B, you know, coming over here, there's another road, who knows? They just kind of fence this off. Right? If there were trees on it, they cut some trees down, okay, and they put a little house over here. All right. And A doesn't notice. It's kind of far away. Well, this isn't a mistake. B knows they don't own this land. Okay. Put B right here. B knows they don't own this land, but they do it anyway. They need a place to live. They're not hiding it from anybody. I mean, this is out in the open. Anybody driving on this road can see them do it. Okay. They clearly cut down a bunch of trees. So anybody who's looking at this forest can see that a bunch of trees have been cut down. All right, they're not hiding it. They didn't go to A to ask for permission and they didn't buy it. They just live there. Well, what's A supposed to do about this? Well, normally A would notice, hey, somebody's living on your property, and they'd go and kick them off. And if they refuse to leave, you sue them and you evict them, just like you would if someone is staying in your apartment and they're not paying you rent, right? It's the same idea. If someone is living on your property without your permission, you can kick them off. That's what you do, right? Well, let's say A doesn't do that. A doesn't do that. And so time goes by, and B, lives here peacefully with their fence and all that. We would say after enough time, this property actually would belong to B and not to A anymore. So if say 20 years later, A comes over to B and says, look, you got to leave. This is not, we're not okay with this. B would say, sorry, mine now. I'm not leaving. A goes to sue them, and B would say, and B in that lawsuit would say, court, please tell A that this is my property and they can't have it. And the court will do that. Okay. And now that they've got a court order, that's proof that it's there, that it's their property. Okay. And then they can sell it and it's theirs. Okay. Why? Well, we don't want people just owning property that they don't do anything with, that they don't check on, that they don't maintain. Okay. In this case, A is not really using this stuff. Okay. Now, it's okay to have land that you don't use. That doesn't mean that everyone can just take everybody else's land. But if you don't use it and you don't check on it and you don't care when other people are trespassing, we would rather have an owner that was paying attention to their property. Okay. Because, I mean, just from a policy perspective, who knows what's going on back here if you're not checking on it? Okay. We're not okay our property law and the way it's developed is not okay with land just sitting there not being used when other people are actually using it and taking advantage of what's there. We would just say, look, B has it. And there are some other reasons for that, right? Everyone else, when they see the situation, probably thinks B owns this property. Okay, because B might even have some people over to visit. B might throw parties there. Okay, he probably has this address here, all this, right? And all of that stuff is being put in the public record, in the public mind, all of that, until eventually we want things to be how they look. Okay, if you've ever heard the expression possession is 9/10 of the law, in this case, we want whoever has the property to be the owner of the property. We gave A lots of time to kick B off and didn't. Eventually, we just want it to be B's. Okay. So let me tell you how that works. There are requirements. You can't just move on to someone's house and just say it's yours. Okay. So let me give you the elements. And they should look pretty familiar. Okay, so the first one is actual possession. So, the elements of adverse possession. 1, actual possession. So let's talk about what that means. It means you have to have and use the property as if you owned it. Okay. So first of all, it's real use as opposed to real fake or imagined use. Okay. You can't just say, oh, that's my property now and not do anything with it. Okay. You have to actually be doing it. And it has to be use that is consistent with normal ownership of the property. So it doesn't necessarily mean living there. Okay. So, for example, B doesn't have to build a house here. B could start farming or raising goats. Okay. That's acting like you have a right to be there. Okay. B could cut down and plant trees and cut down and plant trees and cut down and plant trees as if he owns this area, right? Like he's selling that for timber or whatever. That's acting like you own it. Okay. You could rent it out to someone else. If I put up a fence and then rent it out to you and you pay me rent to live there, that's acting like I own it, right? So it doesn't matter. So I don't actually have to be there, but I have to be acting like I own it with actual possession and use of the property. Okay. All right, number 2, it must be adverse and hostile. Adverse or hostile, really. Okay, and that means the same thing as you've heard it before. It means without permission. Let's go back to our example here. If A leases this to B, B is renting. They can't, after renting for 20 years, go, oh, it's mine now. No, you were renting it. Okay. They can't come to A one day and say, oh, I'm so poor, I need a place to stay. Can I please stay in your cabin in the woods? Yeah, sure, you can stay in my cabin. I hardly use it. And B moves in there. And then after a long enough time, they go, well, mine now. Thanks for letting me stay here. Now I have a cabin. No, it has to be without permission. Okay. So real quick, one way to keep this from happening, possession from happening, is to go and give them permission. Okay. I see that you've trespassed. You know what? I'm going to allow you to stay in my property instead of evicting you. Preferably get that in writing so you have proof. Okay. That would mean that their possession is not adverse or hostile. Okay. It's with permission at that point. Okay. But so this time has to go on and they can never get permission. Okay. Number 3, open and notorious, which means not hidden or in secret. Okay. B can't sneak onto the property in the middle of the night and go hiding in the trees over here and build like a little tree house that you can't even see unless you're really, really looking for it, right? And not make any noticeable, signs that they're there or anything like that. Okay. Because you know what? Sneaking on property doesn't make it look like you own the property. It makes it look like you clearly are using someone else's property. When you own a house, you don't hide it. You go into your house in the front door in the daylight, right? If you are trying to hide the fact that you are using this property, you are not going to get adverse possession. Okay. It must be open and notorious. That does not require that A knows about it. Okay. Like I said, if A is being a bad owner and not checking up on their property, then they're not gonna, that doesn't excuse them from this situation. A knowing about it has nothing to do with it. But A has to be able to find out about it by your actions. Okay. If A is gonna check their property, they should be able to see you living on their property, clearing it or farming it or raising animals or building a house or whatever you're doing on it. If they check the property and they don't see any signs of you, then your use is not open and notorious. Okay. Okay. So far, all of these probably sound familiar, right? What do they sound like? Something we learned about on Monday. Oh no, something we learned about on Friday. Somebody, please. Easements. Yes, sir, Mr. Poston. Yes. These should sound a lot like easement by prescription. It's because it comes from the same concept in property law. The difference between adverse possession and easements is this next requirement. Okay. So this is the one that's different. In order to have adverse possession, your use must be exclusive. Okay. The use is limited to the adverse possessor, the one trying to take the property. Okay. They do not share ownership. So in the case of an easement, you're not acting like no one else is allowed on that property. You're just crossing or fishing or getting water or whatever it is you're doing, right? You're using it for one thing, and then otherwise the other person's allowed to be there. Not true with adverse possession, right? When B moves onto this property, notice what B did. B put up a fence. B is now acting like they own the property, including the right of exclusion that we talked about a couple weeks ago. B is not letting A on this property. That's what's most important. B does not let A onto this property. Okay. That's what separates this from an easement by prescription. Okay. So when B moves onto this property, the first thing I have to do is kick everyone else off. Now, that doesn't mean they never let anybody on the property, right? Because I own a house and I let people in all the time. Okay, I have guests, so well, not lately, obviously, but in general, I have guests over, right? I order food, have packages delivered, right? I might have someone, mow the grass or do pest treatment or whatever. So exclusive doesn't mean no one ever comes on, but it means that when they come on with your permission, right? If A has some sort of inspector walk on to B's property and B doesn't kick them off, then it's not exclusive. B needs to go, hey, what are you doing here? This is my property. Why are you walking on it? What are you doing? Okay. So B has to act like they own this property exclusively. And here's where that becomes a big deal. Okay. Right now we're talking about these huge tracts of land with farms and trees and all that. But adverse possession can happen in the city too. Okay. So if there's an abandoned house, someone can move into that abandoned house. What happens to most abandoned houses though? Lots of people move in, right? And they don't kick each other off and they're not related to each other, right? Sometimes it becomes not a great place to be. Sometimes people just sneak on so they can sleep there at night. Okay. That does not lead to adverse possession. In order for someone to have adverse possession, they need to move into the house and act like it's theirs. They need to kick out all the other people who are staying there for the night and be like, what do you get off my lawn, get out of my house. They need to call the cops and have them arrested if they continue to come onto the property, right? If you have 20 people sleeping in a house in an abandoned house at night, that's just an abandoned house. Okay. If you have somebody step in and clean it up and lock the doors and kick everyone else, now you're starting the process of adverse possession. Okay. All right, and here's the last one. The last requirement is the same as the last requirement for easement by prescription, and that is continuous, which is regular use for a long period of time. In Texas, 10 years. Okay. So just like with an easement, 10 years is how long it takes you to get this in Texas. All right. And there are actually different statutes, a statute meaning law in Texas that deal with this. Some of them are as short as 5 years. I think there's one that might be 2 years. But in general, the general statute, the one where if you do these 5 requirements, you get it, is 10 years. Okay. So B can move onto this property, clear it, build a fence, put up a house, and then if nothing happens in 10 years where A reasserts their rights, they don't sue them, they don't, go give them permission, any of that, over the course of 10 years, this little area will become B's property and not A's property. Okay. Any questions on adverse possession so far? Okay, I'm going to teach you one more thing, and then I'll turn you loose. Should be pretty quick. Let's say B had only been here for 6 years. After 6 years, they don't have it, right? After 6 years, A can still evict them, can sue them to force them off the property. They're trespassing still. But let's say after 6 years, B sells it to C, right? Remember that they have to act like they own it for 10 years. Well, acting like you own it includes the right to sell, the right of transfer. At that moment, they don't have the right of transfer. But let's say they sell it anyway. They sell it to C. And then C stays there for 6 years. Okay. Now notice in this situation, C has not been there long enough. It's not been 10 years. But at this point, A cannot kick off C. Okay. This is something called tacking. This is the last thing I'm going to tell you about. Okay. This is tacking. And this applies both to the adverse possession and to the easement to the prescriptive easement. Okay. So tacking is the idea that the previous adverse possession time of possession is added to the current possessor's time of possession. Okay. Okay, and you can see the most obvious reason for that is that if, let's say B had stayed here for 10 years and now they fulfilled all the requirements, and then they sell it to C, and C's only been there 1 year. If tacking didn't exist, then A could come and kick C off the property because they've only been here for 1 year and haven't fulfilled the requirements for adverse possession. So tacking is really necessary for adverse possession to give full title to someone. Okay, so that's the main reason. But the reason why you can do this even when B hasn't gotten it yet, all right, I just want to make sure the notes are in the chat here. So this is a process called tacking because you tack the years onto each other. Okay, and this can happen any number of times. If B moves in and sells it after 2 years to someone who then sells it after 3 years, who then sells it after 1 year, who then sells it after 6 years, right? All of those get added together. What matters is how long was it being used as if someone lived there or as if someone owned it before A stepped in? That's the real question. Okay. And as long as somebody, and as long as they, in this case, you need vertical privity, like we talked about, right? So as long as the chain can be connected from the current possessor to the original one who stepped in and was trespassing, then all those will be added together. Now, this won't work if B didn't sell it or transfer it to C. If B is doing this and then C comes on and starts trying to adverse possess it over here, right, that won't work because B didn't transfer it to C. C's starting something new. Okay. But assuming that B is acting like they own it and they transfer it to C, that'll work. Okay. Any questions about tacking? All right, quick, let me make sure I covered everything. Okay, I think I covered everything in the quiz. Okay, so there is an adverse possession quiz. Okay. You need to do those. Make sure you come and ask me questions if you have any, and then start looking at the memo. All right. And like I said, we will discuss the memo in more detail. But as of now, you know everything that's going to be covered on the test and everything you need to know to answer the memo. Okay, so any questions about what you're doing? When's the test? The test will be on Wednesday of next week. So 1 week from today. You're welcome. Okay, if there are no other questions, then you are free to go. Take care of stuff during flex time, and I will see y'all on Monday.